Zombie Popcorn, the official podcast of MarsCon 2012. It is Saturday the 14th. Pondering podcast, techniques and directions. Hosted by Keith DeCandido. Other panelists include Helen Madden, Bob Price, Alfredo Torres, and Jason Bayless.
This is the
take us outside.
field trip podcasting techniques. Usually I just talk into a mic, but I guess we can talk for more than an hour and find other things to say. We will start by having the panelists introduce themselves. Hi, I'm Keith.
How you doing? I'm Alfredo. Good to meet you. How you doing? I'm Alfredo.
Hey, I'm Helen.
These guys know each other.
Anyway, yes.
My name's Alfredo Torres. I am a podcaster. I do two podcasts. One, which is Torres versus Zombies, which is part apocalyptic, part pop culture, all zombies. The other one is Bob's Boneyard. I was part of a radio show in 96X in Norfolk area called the Mike and Bob Show. I got fired. Later on, another guy got fired, and then the show was taken off the air, and the Bob of the Mike and Bob and the other guy whose name is Manny and myself decided to start a podcast. We've actually started a podcast company, Boneyard Enterprises, and we host 4 different podcasts.
I'm Helen Madden. I do a podcast called Heat Flash Erotica. For 3 years, I wrote an erotic speculative fiction story every week. I wrote 165 short stories, recorded and produced them in 3 years. And if you do any of the adult late night panels tonight, I'll be there.
Hi, I'm Bob Price. I'm one of the co-hosts of Zombie Popcorn's The Talking Dead. We do a podcast every other Saturday on pop culture, zombie stuff, movies, geek stuff. And then we also do another podcast called This Non-Religious Life, which is about secularism and humanist issues. And I keep tapping the table.
And I am Jason Bayless. I own Zombie Popcorn. I host and produce several podcasts, including The Talking Dead, This Non-Religious Life, The New Architects, and am producing a new D&D style podcast that is starting very, very soon. I'm always open for new ideas, new stuff. On the side as well, we focus on horror, pop culture, independent horror. We have contests constantly where we give out autographed books, CDs, free movie tickets, everything. So we kind of just encompass everything that I love and like to share with people that happens on Zombie Popcorn.
And I'm Keith DeCandido. I'm an international best-selling, award-winning author of various and sundry books, like this Dungeons and Dragons novel and my high fantasy police procedurals and Dragon Precinct, Unicorn Precinct. I wrote the Farscape comic book for a while, written about a dozen Star Trek novels, and comic books. I've edited things, I've written things, all sorts of stuff. That's not why I'm here, but I mention it only because I want you to buy all my books, so please go do that. I'm also part of the Chronic Rift Network, which is started with the Chronic Rift, which is a podcast about various and sundry pop culture things. We do interviews, spotlights, in-review episodes, and we do roundtable panel discussions. That spawned a network of a whole bunch of different ones, including my own podcast, which is called Dead Kitchen Radio, which is where I talk about my work, and I talk about various and sundry different projects I'm working on and do readings from my work. Dead Kitchen Radio is an anagram of Keith R. A. DeCandido, which is where the title comes from. And we have a bunch of others. We have one on called Cyborgs, the Bionic Podcast, which is actually frighteningly popular, talking about the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, which has a number of fans that, frankly, scares me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
The Weekly Podioplex, which is about movies. We've got one about B-movies, all sorts of stuff. There's a flyer. And I forgot I was going to moderate this until just now, so I don't really have anything particular prepared. But since it's supposed to be about techniques, why don't we go down the table here and each talk about the methods by which you produce the podcast and also promote the podcast and get listeners and such.
I'll start. I guess I'm the newest one here. Our podcasts the zombie podcast has only been coming out since June of last year, and I think in March is when we had started the Bob's Boneyard. So I'm in the process of trying to get the word out about my podcast, which it's very difficult in the sense of you have to be able to find your audiences. When I was on public radio, all I had to do was talk, because people were seeking me, in the sense of like all you had to do was turn on the radio. If you like that station, like that music, you heard me. Here, even though there are people seeking zombie, in my case, zombie pop culture podcasts, I have to find out where they're looking, which is kind of unique for me because I'm going into a area that's already saturated with people doing what I do and who've been doing it longer. So
people are talking about zombies? I had no idea.
I don't know if you heard. This is
wow.
This is an up and coming thing. $5 billion industry last year.
Just about.
Yeah. But the thing is,
it'll die out eventually, but then it'll spring back to life.
I thought the punch show was yesterday.
Yeah, I wasn't here for it.
So. But anyway, the point being that I have to seek out the audiences, and then I have to sell myself in a way that's different from the way everyone else is selling themselves in my genre. So that's my difficulty right now, and what I'm trying to come to terms with.
My podcast is actually on hiatus right now after writing so much for 3 years. I needed a bit of a break so I could come up with fresh material. I will probably start podcasting again this May. I basically learned about podcasting from T. Morris, who is one of the writers of Podcasting for Dummies. And T's main emphasis, which I firmly believe, was that content was first, and that all the expensive equipment and the software and everything came second. You had to have content first. I'd been writing erotica for a few years at that point. I wanted to find a way to reach a broader audience than what I had, and I have 2 degrees in communication, 1 in broadcasting. So it really seemed like a natural fit for me to get a small, low-tech microphone, get a little bit of software on the computer. I was using SoundForge, I believe, originally, which was free. And then get a little bit of looping software for $25 to do bed music and a few special effects, and just throw that together. And I started off very simply. Originally, the stories were no more than 200 words. By the time I reached the end of the 3 years, I was writing almost 6,000 words a week, which is the reason why I ended up taking a break, because I had literally written myself into the ground, and I'm thinking when I start back, I'm either going to podcast something I've already written, or I'm going to go back to the 200 words a week rule, because there was an audience for that, for something short, simple, and to the point. I podcast in my walk-in closet. I have a Zoom H2 microphone, which has a little memory card in it. I just turn a button on, I make sure that the levels are showing up okay on the display in the microphone, and I read straight into the microphone. When I'm done, I connect it to my computer via USB cable, it downloads the audio, and then I open up my Goldwave software and I start cleaning up. My biggest problem that I've had to wrestle with has been the actual quality of my voice. I have to work at having a clear, clean speaking voice. I tend to stumble over words. I tend to get some mouth pops and some jaw clicks and the like. And I really had to spend the last year focusing on doing vocal exercises before I walked into that closet to record. It made all the difference in the world, because if I didn't do that, I was looking at least 2 extra hours of cleaning up audio, which, when you're on a very tight schedule, a weekly deadline, sucks. But I do try to keep things very simple. So if you want to know how to do it simply, talk to me.
Our show, we have a lot of equipment here, but I think it's just because we're dudes. Like, I don't know, guys, guys do that. And
It's impressive equipment.
Yeah, right. I know, thanks. But you know, we find you can get bogged down in the nuts and bolts of it, and really our whole sort of slogan has been, let's just do it. You know, let's just go ahead. And if somebody has an idea, and you know, we may kick around some technical difficulties, but then it's at the end of the day, it's like, oh, let's just do it. You know, let's move forward. Just go, take that first step, and then we worry about the technical stuff later because that'll work itself out.
Yeah, I am definitely a strong believer in stop talking about it and do it. I grew up with a speech impediment, and I have a hard time talking. I have a hard time saying words, but I have a hardcore obsession with 3D movies. I've collected 3D movies since I was like in 6th grade, and I found a 3D webcam, and I said, you know what? I'm going to make a 3D live broadcast. Didn't know what I was going to talk about. I love horror movies. I love, books. So I said, I'm going to get a Ustream account. I'm going to broadcast in 3D. I know everybody hates 3D, but this is what I love. This is what I want to put out there. And within like 2 months, I had people writing me saying, hey, I want to be on your show. I want to talk about my new product. I want to talk about this. People inviting themselves onto the show, say, can we just hang out? And we have a guy, he goes by the name of 3D Movie Man. And this was all live. So all the technical issues that we had, I learned how to overcome the technical issues on the live show. So there was
Yeah.
I mean, you can go back. I do back then. I didn't edit anything that we recorded went up, and it's still on the site. And you can see there are shows that half of it is without audio, and we didn't know.
Whoops.
Yeah.
So
Hand gestures become important.
Yes, and there was a bunch of chat room. We put the chat room up in the live feed too, and so we were doing that. And Bob came along, and a couple other people came along and said, hey, this is what we want to do, and it just all came together. So I decided it would be in the best interest to take down the live feed until we perfected the pre-recorded feed. Eventually we will go back live, and we will have 3D content and all that, but now we're focusing on the content. Before we didn't. I just wanted to talk and share stories, because I traveled for 6 years of my life and was surrounded by 20,000 people every single night. And the one thing that I miss the most about that is meeting people, hearing their stories, hearing about what they're doing. I don't care what it was. And that's what gave the birth to Zombie Popcorn. And it's the bottom line, it's just there's one step between talking and doing, and all you have to do is take it, and that's what we do.
You know what? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, one thing I forgot to mention, because I'm an idiot, is in addition to Dedication Radio and the Chronic Rift, I'm also part of a zombie audio drama called HG World, which is it's a full-on drama, and I'm also involved with Gypsy Cove audio drama as well, doing some voices for that. And one of the cool things about podcasting is that it's kind of returned the audio drama.
Yeah, we've been kicking around doing one of those too.
The shadow.
And one of the ones on the Rift Network is called The Dome, and that's something John created years ago, and did one CD of it and it never went anywhere. And now that we've got the podcasting network out, one of the challenges with that, and I should add that I do nothing on the technical end of things. I barely can operate that handheld recorder there. I'm pretty sure I pushed the right button. But, my solution is to record my bit. I use Audacity, which is also free. I record it, and then I send it to John, and he does what he does. And, having John around is very handy. He does all the technical stuff for us. Because he's more into that. I only have so much RAM in my brain for stuff. I can handle, like, Star Trek trivia up the kazoo, But, and I can give you all sorts of weird details about the statistics of members of the New York Yankees. But audio stuff, it's like I ran out of room. But one of the challenges, just talking with the people doing HG World and with John with the Dome, is when you're doing an audio drama, there's an added layer of difficulty because you're not all recording together. Mm-hmm. Even when we do like our in-review episodes, we're all on Skype together, so you can make the adjustments there, and everybody's at basically the same level. Trying to do an audio, we have two people who are supposed to be having a conversation, and one guy recorded it on one computer in Australia, and the other one on his handheld recording machine in Boston or something. And it's sometimes a nightmare to get that completely done so that it still sounds good. It seems to be working because HG World actually won a Parsec Award at DragonCon this year against some pretty stiff competition. We were very pleased. My role is to be the voice of Todd Rage, who's sort of the Greek chorus of it. He's an elderly right-wing Vietnam veteran radio talk show host. This is why they call it acting, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's gotten some really good responses. With the Rift Network, we started out just doing it. It started out actually as a public access show back in the 90s. We did it, and in fact, we've been re-releasing, for reasons I don't understand, re-releasing the 20-year-old episode, so you can see me as a 22-year-old. It's really kind of embarrassing. Talking about various, science fiction, fantasy stuff, and then we revived it as a podcast, and it really, there were so many different elements that came into it, and it just built a following, partly because of the guests we had on. We had a bunch of different authors and producers and things, and actors and such, and it just built and built until we got us a decent audience.
I was going to say, do we just want to open up to these guys to find out what they want to know about podcasting techniques? Because with technical questions, somebody's usually here with something specific.
Yeah, sure.
I was wondering if there was any if there's any good way to determine what the field is like at this point, what casts seem to be getting the largest audiences, what trends there are, things like that.
I study communications. I'm working on my master's at ODU, and
well, you're the person to ask.
well, it's interesting because we're in a paradigm shift. We're going.
Aren't we always?
But we're going from.
I know what he's talking about.
From public, we're going from public to personal. Yeah. From macro to micro, and so this is all uncharted water. The things that people on this panel are doing now are the things that are going to get taught in 5 to 10 years in schools as to how to be successful, to be podcast stuff. So as far as how to get out there, right now, it's the Wild West. You do what you want, and if that's working for you, then stick with it, because there's no Adam Carollas here or Kevin Smiths or Joe Rogans that have got that kind of name with that kind of money behind them when they'll sit there and say, okay, I'm gonna start a podcast, and it's the Kevin Smith podcast. Oh, I know Kevin Smith. I watch Mallrats. Let's
Oh, come on! Nobody watched Mallrats.
I watched Mallrats.
You're the one.
I love Mallrats.
Yes. Hey, you know what? It was a very uncomfortable position, I think. But it's the Wild West right now, and and like for us, excuse me, with Torres versus Zombies, we're trying to get advertising, and what's tough is there's no model. You can go for radio, and radio has been selling advertising for years. TV, selling it for years. There's no way to get, for me to look back and go, oh, this is how they did it 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Especially with something like myself, or I'm sure everybody here, but I'm so very niche oriented. My podcast is for zombie fans. Not for horror fans, though I'd like them. Not for sci-fi fans, though I'd like them. It's zombie fans. So now, if I'm out there trying to get advertising dollars, I'm sitting there going up to you and saying, hey, why don't you, advertise on my show? Well, what's your show about? Zombies? I'm a grocery store. Yeah.
Brains.
Yes.
Well, you sell water.
There you go.
I will say, in light of what he's saying here, the key words to podcasting are consistency and persistence. Because if you provide content on a regular, reliable basis, you do build a following. I know a number of podcasters who, when they first started out, they had maybe a handful of people who were listening because they knew that person, they were friends, and they didn't want them to feel bad. And some of these people are now doing very successfully. Mur Lafferty is a writer who does a podcast called I Should Be Writing, which was, her podcast was about her attempts to become a published author, to get an agent, to get a publisher to look at her book, to sell it, etc. She's never made it into the large publishing arena, But last year, she decided to do a limited print run of books that she had podcasted. And she ran a Kickstarter project to raise the money to do it. She said she needed $5,000 to print X number of books. She made $15,000 in 30 days.
Nice.
That is a sign of success, and it is because she has podcasted I Should Be Writing and all her novels and all her other projects consistently for the last 5-6 years. And it's the same with Scott Sigler, J.C. Hutchins, T. Morris and Philippa Ballantyne, all the kinds of people. You may not be able to get advertisers, but I know writers who can turn to an agent and say, look, I podcast this novel, I had X number of downloads, I get this kind of feedback, there is an audience for this, there are people looking for it. Or who can go like Murr and say, if you really want to see this in print and I can't get a publisher to pick it up, let's do this together.
Advertising is tough, though. I mean, we tried that with the Rift, and it worked for a little bit, but because what you said, there's not much of a model there, and particularly with the Chronic Rift is so scattershot. When we can't always predict which episodes are going to wind up getting hits or not, and sometimes people will only listen for that one. Like we had Frank Conniff on one episode talking about Rift Tracks and Mystery Science Theater 3000 and all that stuff, and we got a whole bunch of people who came there because they were fans of Frank Conniff, but they didn't stick around. Some of them did. Others, it varies.
To answer your question about the direction it's going, if you follow any of like streaming media marketing, blog marketing or stuff like that, every marketing company, every major marketing company out there now, if you run a blog and that's your primary focus to reach your clients, they are telling them to subsidize that blog with a podcast or a netcast. Don't rely on just one. Any mainstream streaming media marketer will tell you that if you want to grow your brand, you have to start a podcast or a netcast. And when it comes to advertising, that is one thing that I struggle with the most. I don't have a problem finding advertisers. I have people emailing me all the time. I turn down so many just because of personal beliefs against the company. I
Send them my way.
I mean, if you want,
I've got no shame.
Because since I run a site that's something that I believe in, and for people who are coming on the site, the only requirement that I have, like if you want to run a podcast or guest blog on the site, the only thing that I require the person to do is to really enjoy what they're writing about or what they're doing. That's the only requirement. With that said, I won't have food advertisements on my website. I won't have American Apparel with their half nude women on my website because one, I don't agree with it. Two, it doesn't fit my content. It has no KFC. Who cares? We talk about zombies. We talk about horror movies. It doesn't make sense.
Zombies don't like fried chicken?
What's that? Well, I'm also vegan, so that...
Oh, okay, yeah.
But, and you
I do
also
see the problem.
You have to consider that the podcast in and of itself is an advertisement because that was why I started podcasting. I was a writer who wanted to reach a larger audience.
That's why I started Dead Kitchen Radio also.
If I am giving you a free audio story every week, then at some point that translates into something where, okay, I get to be a guest at certain conventions. I have people who do come and buy the books. I have people who take interest in my other projects that I do. I have name recognition now that I did not have 4 years ago when I started podcasting. And I have people who have emailed me saying, when are you coming off hiatus? I'm like, let me get through Girl Scout cookie season, please. Okay.
You mentioned one thing that's real interesting, which is Kickstarter. We started off at Kickstarter, and Boneyard Industries, which is the parent company. We started off at Kickstarter, and we used our name recognition in the Hampton Roads area because we were all on the radio. What's interesting is of the 4 shows that we do, 3 of them involve people with prior broadcasting experience, and the one that doesn't is the one that's doing the best, which is Get Mommy a Drink, which is funny because they sit there and they're and people love it. Meanwhile, here all of us, the rest of us are like, well, yes, and we'll talk about it, and be like, yeah, that's great.
But I think there's a sincerity to the podcasting, and I think that's why it's popular because,
also it's free.
Well, but,
some of it's free.
We get enough of the advertising money where the site is sort of like self-sustaining,
right?
And But we do it because we just like sitting around shooting the shit for 2 hours every week about movies and stuff we love. You know, like that's the part. That's why we do it.
Well, it's telling. I think that we have 3 different types of episodes on the Rift. The spotlights, which are usually an interview with somebody. There's the roundtable discussions, which is a panel discussion with about 4 or 5 people at most. And then there's the in-review episodes. In the in-review episodes, we have reviews of a bunch of different things, but surrounding that is 3 or 4 of us sitting around talking about various things and shooting the shit about stuff we like.
One of my favorite podcasts was your ADD podcast, which was just 3 or 4 people sitting around with beer.
Yeah.
Just completely distracted.
Beer's a
But we're actually going to relive that podcast in the bar when this is over. If you guys would like to see it in action.
The most popular episodes consistently are the in-review ones, which are the ones where we're doing with the least. I mean, it's still got a structure, but it's the one where it's the most free form out of all of them. The one where we're doing the most off the cuff talking, and that's what gets the most downloads every single time.
Yeah.
I actually had a question about that. About what length do you find? Like, is there a sort of a sweet spot for length where after 30 minutes or after an hour?
It depends. It depends on what the content is.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons originally we started out putting it all together, doing like everything at once, and we realized we were getting into like 2-hour podcasts, and that was getting ridiculous. With the Rift, we try not to go too much over an hour. The interview episodes sometimes will. For Dead Kitchen Radio, I try to keep it at no more than half an hour if I can possibly do that.
Yeah,
there's a value to brevity sometimes.
One of the problems that you come across in any kind of broadcasting is the quick nature of people. You've got, and I forget the exact term for it, but it's. I'm sorry. Well, ADD. Yeah. ADD is what it comes down
Short
to.
Short attention span.
Right. Thank you. It's where if you don't catch them in the first minute and a half, 2 minutes, it's done. So when you do your podcast, this is a problem I have in trying to refine mine. It's supposed my podcast normally is a half hour once a week. However, I've gone up to an hour. And one of the problems I'm having is to hit that consistent time, because once people get into a show, it's reliable and they know what they're getting. So if I put out my show first thing at midnight Monday, so they know if you listen to my show Monday at midnight, it's there. If it's not there Monday at midnight, you start to wonder. The other important thing, and this is the part I haven't got down, is to keep it at a certain length, okay? Because then that way you know what to expect. Okay, I got to devote a half hour to this show once a week, or I've devoted an hour to this show twice a week. If you mess with that time, the person gets tired because they can't concentrate.
It also depends on whether or not the show is segmented to something. Like for example, there's a Farscape podcast called the Scapecast. They had a bunch of different segments they did in each one, and so that one they could afford to go a little longer because they publish their show notes and you can skip to the part. If there's this segment you're not interested in, you could very easily skip to it. For that matter, our interview episodes are like that too, where you can jump around. If you're doing something where it's just you and somebody else talking about one thing straight through, there is a certain point where you really need to. You're going to start losing people if you let it go on.
Now, I podcast fiction, and I ran anywhere from 54 words to 10,000 over the course of 3 years, and I always ran a story complete. So if I had a 10,000-word story, you got quite a lengthy chunk of podcast right there. Yeah, I never
like an hour
had
and a half.
complaints about the length of the podcast, though, because it was fiction.
Right.
It was the content. And the thing that's just how it went.
But it's also something where fiction is also something where you can more easily pause it because all right, I'll get the rest of the story later. Unless you're so completely sucked into their brilliance that you keep going, which you probably were. But what you mentioned about consistency is also important too, and you mentioned it also, is that if you're honest, one of the things we try to do with the Rift is always try to get something out every week.
We try to keep ours at about an hour, and we've sort of thought about like how do people consume the media, right? Like how do you listen to podcasts? And about an hour is about right because I listen to podcasts when I'm home doing dishes, and because everybody has iPhones.
You don't
smartphones,
do dishes.
But like it's something to do. It's the drive on the way to work. It's the 40. It's during your commute.
20 minutes in the gym on the elliptical.
Right. I mean, like think about how people consume the media. Think about how you would consume the media. That's your answer.
But it also, I mean, we run another show. It's our second popular show. It's 2 hours long every week. It's 2 hours, and some weeks it's split up into two parts. The first 30 minutes or the first hour is somebody we're interviewing, and then the second half is that we're just talking about movies, whatever's topical that time. Most of the time, it's the whole 2 hours of us talking about new movies coming out, independent film, whatever we want to bring in that week. And I've done that show since 2 years now. I've never once had anybody complain about the length. I've had more people say, outside of their normal comments, saying that they wish we could talk about this subject a little bit longer next time.
Mm-hmm.
But we always cut it off at 2 hours.
The key with
It's a matter of building expectation and sticking to it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and again, the consistency. If you do a 2 hour show and they know it's a 2 hour show, they know to commit 2 hours. And again, if it's out every Saturday at 8 o'clock, or like mine, Monday at midnight, that new episode is out then, because people are creatures of habit, and if they start going, in my case, to those Monday nights at midnight and the show is not there, and that happens 2 or 3 times, well, then they're going to stop going there. They stop going there, they stop downloading. Now I'm pretty much talking to myself.
And so this, to actually answer the question, sweet spot varies from podcast to podcast.
What do you do about getting feedback beyond download count? How much time a week do you spend paying attention to it?
Because of the nature of my podcast, do not get a lot of feedback, either in email or recorded or otherwise, because this is not something you listen to without your earbuds on. It is very strictly for adults only. And some people can be a bit squeamish when it comes to
Erotica.
giving you that feedback in some way that giving you the female.
It was an interesting Freudian
in
slip.
some way where it can be traced back to them. But then again, as time passed, I had people who were constantly sending me email and Facebook and the like. And when I had the opportunity, I would mention them. If they gave me a name to mention them by, that they were okay with using, and I would say, somebody had this question. I had my intro music. I would give the title of the story. I would have the story. Then I would have outro music, and I had my comments. And I would either use that time to comment upon what I had just recorded and explain, this is a bit about where this comes from in the background, or I could use that time to make announcements about upcoming events, or I could use that time to do listener feedback if somebody had a question or something. Because I did not have a call-in line set up like some shows do, I did not have any recorded feedback.
We actually have on chronicgrift.com we have a forum, and very occasionally people post in it, but not nearly as often as we'd like. We also, we've got email, we even have a toll-free number for reasons I've never been too clear on, and I think it's been used maybe twice in 3 years.
Getting feedback can be quite difficult.
One of the things that you need to do, or that I would recommend doing now, is become extremely social media savvy. Yeah. Extremely. I mean, that's how you get feedback. A show like mine, I don't listen to my own show. I can't stand the sound of my voice. I can't. And I have people who sit there and they love my voice. I don't like it. It sounds crappy when I hear it recorded. And so I can't listen, because then I don't concentrate on the content. I concentrate on my voice, and I start to get pissed off, and then I'm throwing things, and I'm, why? Yeah. That kind of stuff. So I need the feedback. Yeah. And getting feedback is so difficult. So you have to become social media savvy. You got to get on Facebook and Twitter and even things like MySpace and LinkedIn. It doesn't matter if it's not a Facebook type of network. You need to just go out there and advertise yourself and sell yourself and constantly request that feedback.
And you still won't necessarily get any.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know.
Comment sections on a blog and on a podcast there was an article in one of the marketing magazines that came out last month saying that trolls have killed comment sections. Yeah. A lot of sites are just shutting down comment sections because they're syncing their blog up or their site with Facebook or G+, and that's where all the feedback is coming in. That's the direction. Comments on a page are something that's dying.
On the other hand, it's very valuable when you do get it. I mean, one thing I did was I had a couple of possibilities. I wasn't sure what my next Dead Kitchen Radio was going to be about. So on my blog and on Facebook and a couple of other places, I put out, asking people, what do you want to see for the next one? I got all of 2 suggestions. I liked one of them, and so I went with it.
As a reader of blogs and journal news items with a forum, I'll see one that says, and there are 240 comments. After about 15, I don't care.
Yeah.
I usually read the comments.
Honestly,
for laughs.
we'd kill for 240
Oh,
comments.
I don't think I've gotten 240 comments in all my blogs.
Yeah.
And,
But also, but a part of it is, I think, a byproduct of the fact that it's not something you. It's the same reason why a lot of people don't write to their favorite TV show for the most part.
You just enjoy it.
Yeah, because it's something that it's like they open iTunes and there's their podcast and they listen to it
And they're
that's
happy.
it. Yeah.
And you'll hear, though, when you've messed something up.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
I want to respond to that because I used to be in podcasting. I stopped about 2 years ago when I went back to school. But what my co-host and I would do is on our show, we would say specifically, we want to hear the good and the bad. We want it all. You will have your email read on the show. People are vain. They love to hear their comments and their name read on the show. When they know so many other people are listening. They love hearing that.
And there are some shows that specifically do feedback episodes where all they do is they answer emails, texts, they have people call in, they have people send in recordings of questions and the like, and it is nothing but feedback. And I've seen this happen in fiction-based podcasts where it's just the writer is answering questions, whatever they can about plot without spoilers, and they're saying thank you for the comments, etc. Or it can be, technical podcasts where people come up with questions about how do you repair XYZ on your computer, and the guy can then go into detail about something that he's not discussed before on the podcast. But keep in mind, feedback can also be a very subtle thing. 3 years ago, nobody knew who the hell I was. I'm a regular podcasting guest here and at Balticon and at Farpoint, and I have people asking about the podcast now, and I get X number of downloads, which I track with Stat Counter, and I may not be getting a lot of comments in the comment section or even on Twitter, etc. But I do more now in terms of going to conventions and selling books and promoting my own work and getting it sold than I was doing 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. I was stunned when I found out how many downloads I was getting on Dead Kitchen Radio because I wasn't getting any feedback at all. Nobody was,
You're shouting into the void.
Yeah, and it turns out there were people listening. They just were just listening.
They were happy. They were happy.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that.
One of the things that I've come across that has started to help me branch out is what I call gaining legitimacy. Here I am doing a zombie podcast. Who am I in the zombie community? Nobody. But as I go,
I just love that there's a zombie community.
It's, again,
no, I know.
$5 billion industry last year. But by gaining legitimacy, I mean I go out and I interview people, or I get a hold of people, get feedback from people who are known in the community. So while I could throw out names like David Moody or Matt Molk, who mean nothing to people outside of that community. In the community, David Moody is an extremely successful author. Matt Molk is an extremely successful author, founder of the Zombie Research Society. I'm sure I'm wearing.
He's on our show next week.
Is he?
Yep.
Awesome guy. Awesome. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
But by getting these people on, now they, of course, are promoting their agenda like everybody else. So they'll sit there and say, hey, I'm on Torres versus Zombies this week. I get to expose my audience or my show to a whole new audience, which automatically has legitimacy to that audience because I am interviewing their author.
Yeah, you do a lot of networking with other podcasters. You can do a lot of networking with people who run blogs, who have anything to do in your area. Somehow get them involved in your show, and they will freely advertise your show to their audience. And you build up this network over time. People who I did not know a few years ago will contact me now and say, would you be willing to write for this? Something, if you've got time to go ahead and put it together. Or I can contact people who had no idea who I was and say, hey, would you be willing to help out with this project that I've got? It's fantastic because you can combine your audience with theirs when you pull your two names together and you both benefit from it.
Yeah, we had a couple guys from a Doctor Who podcast called Podshock that and our numbers skyrocketed because they've been doing their podcast since the dawn of time, and so to speak, and that they brought in a bunch of people, also getting, like you said, interviewing people who were well known or people who are famous for other things. We had Rockne O'Bannon on, the creator of Farscape. We had Juliet Landau on.
You know what I think is amazing about that, though, is I'm constantly amazed that when we ask people on the show, we want to say, hey, you want to be a guest on the show? People say yes.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow,
Well,
really?
I'm
amazed who
people
says
like
yes.
to talk about themselves.
Well, it's not only that. It's
and it's a promotional thing for them.
Exactly.
Too,
When you talk about the kind of shows that we all have here, they're all very niche oriented.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's important for a writer like David Moody or Jonathan Mayberry or Matt Moak to get on my show, because even if I only have 300 people listening to my show, it's 300 people that he can't get or that he now has access to.
Mm-hmm.
That's 300 possible books that he could sell.
And they're also, and it goes the other way, because there are people. Jonathan's a huge bestselling author.
Exactly.
So people say, "Oh, Jonathan's on this podcast. Let me check it out."
Let me check it
Jonathan's
out.
going to be on Zombie Popcorn on our show next Saturday. We're recording Saturday.
Jesus, why am I going to get
He's
him?
also guest blogging on our site, and we're in the process of setting up a contest with him. And they reached out to us, but there's also another aspect of what we do as podcasters. I don't just advertise for people. I don't wait for them to come to me to say, I have a new book, can I be on your show? I go after things that I really love. Like there's a new app from a guy in Scotland. It's called Popcorn Horror, and it totally supports independent film. What his app does is independent filmmakers can upload their short films to his server. He pays them $200 straight off the bat, and then gives them, because it's a subscription-based app, and they get a cut for it, as long as people are watching it. I like that so much. When I checked out the app, I actually emailed him and said, why don't you come on the show? Why don't we do a contest? Why don't we do this? We're giving away to 5 winners right now on the site for a full year subscription of his app. And we are starting to review, and because I want to support independent horror, so we're going to have all those filmmakers come on our show. We're going to talk about their films, help them build their audience, because it's not necessarily just about, us and how many views we get and how many advertising dollars. It's about really building our community. I mean, Hollywood and everything has their side of the industry taken care of, and I'm a big, strong believer that we need to stick together when we don't have the money.
Podcasting has a huge, very supportive community. If you do a podcast and you put together a 30-second ad, you can probably contact 5 podcasters right off the bat and say, hey, I'm new. This is what I do. Your show is kind of somewhat similar. Would you be willing to run my 30-second little ad in your show? And they'll do it.
It's so great to see that.
It costs you nothing.
Coming from public radio, where it's sit there and as they're shaking your hand, the other hand's got the knife in your back. It's so nice and so refreshing to see that, and it's so and again, that we're all in the same spot. If there's 1,000 zombie fans out there, and I've got 200, and they've got 300, and one of you guys has another 200, by sitting there and supporting each other, we could all have 700.
Yeah.
In fact, I just did something where Philippa Ballantyne and T. Morris have a new steampunk novel out, which is doing very well. They contacted several writers who were podcasters that they knew and said, would you be willing to write a short story in this universe? Record it for us. We will run it on our podcast. You get $25 for the short story, because that's really all we can pay you for. But if it goes into ebook format, then we can pay you royalties off the ebook. Oh, and you get our audience listening to your short story connected with this book, which is taking off. I wrote the short story. I would have written it for free at that point. I said, I'll write it, I'll record it, you guys can have it. Mazel tov. It's fantastic because you can do that for each other. Writers will come together. If one writer's having a big book launch, he can contact 10 other writers and say, I need short stories. Would you write them and record them? And they will do it. So.
Any other questions from the floor?
From the ceiling.
From the plant. Yes.
How about? I have a question. You were talking earlier about if you have the content, then you can worry about the technical later. I do a podcast. Actually, my co-host started it, and I just kind of fell into it because his other co-host left, and I can talk and whatever. And for us, the content is there, but we have had a lot of technical issues, and we've had a hard time because podcasters use this podcaster uses this, and this podcaster uses this. We've had a lot of problems because neither one of us are technical people trying to resolve a lot of the issues. Have you found that there are communities of people, or there are ways to figure out?
Well, I can tell you what. I'll give you my email, and anybody who wants to start a podcast, I will help you with any technical issue you have. I will, even if you don't have the money to host it, I will host it on the site, as long as it's not some crazy,
Well,
but within reason, I will go out of my way
A
to
lot of
help
podcasters
anybody
will.
to get a podcast if they want to do it up there. I mean, you can ask Bob. I have no free time in my work in my life. I'm at the computer editing vidcast, podcast, and helping other people get their podcast out because it's that important. So I'll give you my email.
One of the things you'll find in the podcast community at our level and with our audiences is an incredible amount of forgiveness. They, you know what? If they want the expert and they want the corporate and all the rest of the big business, evil people, they'll listen to the Kevin Smiths and the Aaron Carollas. And that's not saying that they're not entertaining. Okay, but by listening to us and you, we put them one step closer to reaching their dream. Nobody here is going to make Howard Stern money. No one here is going to make God willing. We all do, but no one's going to do it.
Nice,
But and the majority of everybody here on this panel, the one thing that they have, regardless of what we do, is love for the genre that we podcast about, and our audiences love that we do that.
Do it for the fun and for the love of it.
Yeah.
Because there are people who have been very successful. Scott Sigler is on the New York Times bestseller list.
Mm-hmm.
But seriously, for every Scott Sigler, you got plenty of us.
You got plenty
and
of
we
us.
are perfectly happy doing what we do. We are getting out of it what we want. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential for success there. But you know what? Just get out there and do it and enjoy it.
I mean, there is a risk. I mean, you said it was the Wild West, and there are times when you're going to wind up being, dead in the desert, being eaten by coyotes. But it's worth the risk,
Or vultures.
Or vultures.
And it's not one side. It's not. I listen to his podcast all the time, Torres versus Zombies.
Did you never told me?
I'm telling you now.
And he's got it on recording.
And it's being recorded, so we have to... It's like being under oath.
I mean, I love listening to podcasts. I love hearing what people have to say. And the biggest thing as supporters, listeners can do is not, the biggest thing that you can do is listen to our podcast. You don't have to comment. You don't have to tell us you like it. It makes us happy. But the biggest thing you can do is listen to it and tell your friends how awesome it is. Even if you hate it, tell us you hate it. Tell your friends that you hate it, because controversy sells.
And if you want to be a podcaster, the biggest thing you can do for yourself is say, to hell with it, and just go ahead and do it. Because even if you are shouting at the void, at least you are doing something.
I agree with that 110%, and I kind of feel kind of bad that you're knocking on Kevin Smith a little bit. I really like that guy.
It's got you know what? God bless him, because he's a rags to riches story.
Well, he is, but I do listen to his podcast, and at the end of his podcast,
it's very funny.
He says the most important thing. He's like, "Oh my God, if I'm up here doing it, a talentless hack like me, you can do it."
Oh, no, I agree. I just wish he would have he wasn't talking to me, because when I sent him that email saying, "Hey, I'm starting a podcast," he's like, "Yeah."
I did. I have a question. The people that maybe are new to podcasting and not just doing it, listening to it. Because aside from you and y'all and Kevin Smith, I don't really know anything about listening to podcasts. So what do you do about competition? You guys, you're self-proclaimed, small guys, and you have these big guys, and then there's so many podcasts out there. So how do you
do your own thing? That's what it comes down to. When I started out podcasting erotica, there was only one other person doing it on a weekly basis. Now there's like 24, I think, and it doesn't matter.
I think she's talking about list. I think you're talking about picking.
It's not really
about picking what goes in.
Yeah, like how do you get? I mean, you guys
talk about this a little bit earlier, but with so much competition out there, and I like how you guys are saying it's such a tight-knit community, really, amongst the podcasters themselves. So where do you
just same way. How do you if I don't recommend a reader to you for a book, an author? How do you pick a book? You walk in and you look. There's 1,000 books there. Something interests you. Look at every podcast should have a description of what it is.
There's a great app that you can get for Android and iPhone called Stitcher.
Yep.
Awesome because
Stitcher's a good app.
You don't have to sync it automatically. It's on demand podcasting, but it has pretty much any topic that you would want to listen to.
And iTunes allows you to browse to some degree as well.
I was going to say iTunes too. I mean, because any podcast that you hook up on iTunes is automatically like
right. So
they're similar to it.
I'm going to mention
just type a term into the search thing and bang, there's however many podcasts right there.
That's one of the best ways for you to do it is to just go out there and jump in.
Sample it.
Yeah, you like zombies? Type in zombie podcast and they'll come up. I'll come up. Others will come. We're Alive is another one.
Should come up.
If you like fiction, though, one place I'd recommend starting is podiobooks.com. You get a chapter per week, or however quickly the author can get it to podiobooks.com. They do have a PayPal button if you want to donate. So these authors do have the option of getting a little bit of money that way. I don't think anybody's ever been able to do more than buy dinner off of it. But if you want to give feedback, nothing says love like 20s.
We're pretty much out of time, but I want everyone to get a chance to speak into the microphone and give the website where their podcasts are. So starting.
As you know, we are the official podcast of MarsCon. So all the panels on here will be on zombiepopcorn.com, including this one. So if you enjoyed this, please go download it.
Zombiepopcorn.com.
And for speculative fiction erotica, the address is www.heatflash.libsyn.com.
For the zombie podcast, it's torresversuszombies.com. You can also get it on iTunes and on Stitcher Radio. And for the Bob's Boneyard, bobsboneyard.com. Same thing with iTunes, Stitcher Radio.
All the Chronic Rift Network shows are on chronicrift.com. HG World is available at goodmorningsurvivors.com. And on iTunes. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Take a flyer. These left if anybody wants those, please.
I have business cards if you want to grab one.
Oh, look, the battery died.
Anytime.
Awesome.
I always hate that when I am like halfway through a 6,000-word chapter.
One more. I'll give you my card as well.
Yeah, I actually live in Norfolk too.
Oh, so that was
Here you guys go.
Oh, thank you.
We're having fun because we've had some.
I got the zombies Valentine in here too.
Skype is a monster. We use Skype all the time, but it's a monster. But there are ways to get it.
Oh, I think all my zombie Valentines have been given away.
Get my song from
Oh, there's the zombie Valentine. I'm selling those in the artist alley.
Right on.
So if you want to get a Valentine for someone you really love, come see me. I'll give you the envelope for free.
All right, right on.
We haven't done the podcast yet. That's the latest thing. We've got a blog, we've got Facebook, Twitter, we've got YouTube. We've got like video interviews.
Sir, you're sitting next to you.